Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing? Good. Great to see everyone here. My name is Matt Lindstrom, and I'm a political science professor and Edward Henry Poli-Sci professor and service director of the Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. And this week is the 5th annual McCarthy Residency, where we bring in a scholar in residence to visit classes and do some presentations like this evening. And it's been a fantastic week so far with John Chromy. We're very honored to have him here tonight and this whole week. And he's certainly been very busy. This afternoon he spoke to the St. Cloud Rotary Club, and he just recently added another class visit for tomorrow morning. So very, very busy guy. But as you'll see in his presentation, he has a lot to share, and we're very thrilled to have him here tonight. Mr. Chromy serves as Vice President of the Cooperative Housing Foundation, otherwise known as CHF International. And this is an international development organization that's founded in 1952. He's been with the organization since '96. And I'm not going to read his long bio, but it's suffice to say it's amazing. He's visited 55 countries. He lived in India for 5 years. He's hitchhiked across the Middle East, I think, over 6 weeks or so. He's worked with 3 presidents. He's testified in front of various Senate and House committees. Lots of stories, lots of amazing stories. He's really touched the world, particularly the most vulnerable folks in this world. And I think in his presentation tonight, you'll see that. We also have a brief PowerPoint, and this young man up here, handsome gentleman, from the record. John Chromy is indeed a St. John's graduate in 1964, and he entered the international development world through the Peace Corps. And I think that the Peace Corps, as well as his education here at St. John's, really served to create a foundation for a strong belief in the common good and service. And I think, again, I think we'll see that tonight. So what we're going to do is just kind of take a look at a few pictures, and we're going to end with a large map of the world, and then John will speak to us for about 30 minutes, give or take. We'll have plenty of time for some Q&A and wrap up maybe 8:30, quarter to 9, about quarter to 9 or so. So I know there's a lot going on this week. They say it's March Madness, and it really is March Madness here at St. Ben's, St. John's, this week at least. So anyway, thanks for your attendance, and I know you'll enjoy this presentation.
The contrast between the first picture and that one tells you what happens in 50 years. We just struck a big deal there. He gave me 6 Taliban for 2 cows. I just wanted you to have a feel for the kinds of places we work and I've been. And I remember calling my oldest sister from Kabul, Afghanistan, and when I told her I was calling from Afghanistan, she said, "You're calling from where?" And I said, "Afghanistan." And she said, "You're calling from Afghanistan?" I said, "Yes." She says, "Ain't that the damnedest thing?" Now that's the way to load a truck. You recall that under the Taliban government, the girls were banned from school. So when the U.S. entered Afghanistan in 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, and we destroyed the Taliban government, they left Kabul in November 28th of 2001. And one of the first things we did when we went there in December was to reopen the schools and allow the girls to come back to school. And today, now there are more than 3 million girls in Afghanistan going to school. Launching a reopening a bazaar that had been burned down. Another place I do a lot of work is the Middle East, and that's and we'll leave the map up there because if I remember, I'll refer to it in a number of parts of the conversation. Thank you all for coming. I recognize some veteran faces in the crowd, so some of whom know the truth from 50 years ago, so I have to be careful what I tell you young folks, but it's been, I came here in September, actually August of 1960, and I came off a farm in New Prague, Minnesota. Okay. Technology will get you every time.
I want to make sure it stays on it, though.
And I was welcomed to St. John's, and that was a whole new world to me. I had never been that far away from home, had never been exposed to people with PhDs and people with great talent and great skills in a variety of fields. I was exposed to professors who had knowledge beyond my dreams, and I was given opportunities to learn and to be part of a great community, the Benedictine community of St. John's. I got a chance to meet great people like Joe Ferry and his wife Jill, Dick and Eileen Haig, Father Don Tollefus, who a lot of you know was our chaplain at the time, and that was part of the great part of coming and being part of St. John's. At the time, President Kennedy had just been elected. It was a time of great excitement and joy that there was a new frontier, a new world being built, and we were going to be part of that. And in the back of my head was a song I had heard when I was a youngster about faraway places with strange sounding names. And I always wanted to travel, I always wanted to go. So when in November of 1962, the Peace Corps sent me an invitation to go to India, I first went to my professor of history and asked for his advice whether I should leave St. John's and go. And he told me, Peace Corps, bah, humbug, the Kennedys, those people, they're crazy. I threw the evaluation forms in the wastebasket. You ought to stay here in college and do what you're doing. So I backed out of his room and found another advisor who was more congenial, and he urged me to go, and I left and went to India in January of 1963. That was the time of Vatican II. And up until that time, we had been taught that Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and other such people were pagans. They were never part of God's plan. They were never going to join him in his eternal life. And in June of 1963, I was standing in the middle of a village in India, looking all around me, and around me I was surrounded by children of Hindu families and a couple of merchants of Islamic families, and I realized that I was on the other side of the world and that I had to learn new things, new understandings, and take advantage of these new opportunities. I took with me from St. John's a number of things that were important. I learned here the key worship and work, the importance of the spiritual side and the manual side, the physical side of life. And I took that with me to India, and it helped me through many difficult situations. I learned here respect for nature and the environment. The Benedictines seem to do amazing things with local clay, with local materials, with local wood, the chairs you're sitting on, the bricks of these buildings, the church they built, and so on. And that's a tradition that has continued all my life, and I now see it all over again here at St. John's. I learned tolerance amongst people of different thoughts. I was always amazed that the Benedictines, you know, we had Father Martin Scherber, who was a Keynesian economist. We had Father Gervais, who was a Milton Friedman acolyte, and they were on the same faculty teaching the same students, and so they confused us. And that went along. I remained confused on that until about 10 years later I had a chance to talk with another economist, John Kenneth Galbraith. So I asked him, I said, Mr. Galbraith, why is it that, you know, economists, first of all, they always say on one hand and then on the other hand and so on. And then, you know, you have two economists on the same faculty and they say exactly the opposite things. And how do we deal with that? He said, well, Mr. Chromy, what you have to understand is that it's probably a good thing all of us economists don't agree, because if we did, we'd probably all be wrong. So I learned that you can tolerate differences, you can tolerate differences of opinion, and you can learn to work with all sides on that. Something that I would hope that our current national political leaders would relearn fairly quickly, because it's important to our democracy and our future. I also learned a real sense of history. This place is 100 years old then. The Benedictine tradition is 1,400 years old. That things pass fairly quickly, and that change happens quickly, but also things stay the same in many arenas, and that immediate issues and changes will quickly pass, and that one should take these things with a grain of salt. So St. John's prepared me fairly quickly for going out into the world and facing a whole new world, a whole new way of life, a whole new task, and a whole new burden. Since I left here, my life has been much, much blessed. I have been one of the luckiest people in the world. I have traveled far and wide, 55 countries. I have lived and worked in numerous countries. I have met the leaders of numerous countries. I've talked to prime ministers. I've talked to presidents. I've testified, as Matt said, before congressional committees. I wasn't being indicted. I was actually asked for good information. And I've met famous people, some of whom were important, and some of them who thought they were important. I've met movie stars. I've met great singers. I've met great musicians. And I had the wonderful opportunity to live and work for 10 years with the Special Olympics and Eunice Kennedy Shriver and the Kennedy family and the Shriver family. Working with the Kennedy family was like a dream for me. John Kennedy was my hero, and I was heartbroken when he was killed. I was in India when he was assassinated, and I heard about it. It happened in the middle of the day here, so that was the middle of the night in India. And I heard about it in the morning when my neighbor and his children, his 3 boys, were knocking at my door at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I opened the door, and they were crying. They had tears flowing down their face. And I said, what happened? And they said, the president is dead. The president has been killed. And I said, Zakir Hussain, the president of India? They said, no, your president, President Kennedy. And they were crying because the American president had been killed. And I turned on the shortwave radio, and sure enough, Voice of America said the president died in the 10th month of his 3rd year in office. And I said, oh my God, that's President Kennedy. And it was a great shock. But the great part of it was that my friends and neighbors in India expressed enormous sympathy to me. The government of India declared a 3-day holiday to acknowledge the death of the American president. And John Kennedy was seen as a great friend of the people of India, of the people of Latin America, the people of Africa. And to this day, and I've been to India 3 years ago, you can still go into shops and see pictures. Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and John Kennedy in people's shops and in people's homes. And it's true in Latin America as well. You will see pictures of John Kennedy with Jesus Christ and Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico. It's an amazing thing. And I was blessed to have a chance to work with his family for a period of 10 years and to be personal friends with his sister and her husband for 25 years. That's a blessing and opportunity that I never dreamed was possible when I was growing up on the farm in Minnesota. I've gained friends in many countries, especially in the Middle East. I have learned to be friends with people of all religions and all political beliefs. I've learned to win my way in very insecure situations. I've learned how to follow security protocols and how to avoid illegal roadblocks and how to respond if your vehicles are shot at and so on. It's been an exciting time, a difficult time, and it's getting worse every day. I've even danced with a princess of the House of Windsor, Princess Alexandra. She came to help inaugurate the new country of the island of St. Lucia, and she was dancing with the Prime Minister and was very bored, so I decided to give her a twirl. So Minnesota farm boys can do things that Prime Ministers can't. So. What I discovered is the world is an incredible place. Incredible place. And when you leave St. John's and St. Ben's, this little cocoon that you're in now, you're going to find it's an amazing place. And I urge you all to travel, explore, experience. The natural wonders of the world are phenomenal. The Sierra Nevada, the Himalayas, the Sahara Desert, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, the city of Jerusalem, the city of Tripoli on the coast of Liberia, or Lebanon has been there 5,000 years. These Phoenician traders launched their boats from there. India is an amazing mixture of languages, peoples, cultures, and history. It's just stunningly phenomenal, the world is. And I've gotten to see almost all of it. I've been enormously blessed. The world is also full of unexplained phenomena. How the Egyptians built those pyramids. Not only built them without the tools, equipment that we know, and we couldn't build them today, they built them in exact proportion and dimensions so that they reflect the Orion's belt in the constellation Orion. Somebody figured out how to do that. How to take those 3 stars, put them on the earth, exact distances, exact locations, and build buildings that were the biggest things in the world with 20-ton stones and make it exactly perfect so that on the solstice the sun shines exactly through a hole in the pyramid right to the center of the pyramid. They didn't even have a slide rule, much less a computer, and they could do this. We don't know how they did it because a lot of knowledge is lost. Stonehenge, they moved 60-ton stones and built also a solar map. Unbelievable. In South America, you see these giant stone drawings on the ground that you can't see unless you fly 20,000 feet above the ground. How did they do it? You don't see it on the ground. They've done it up there. The world is full of unexplained phenomena. But ironically, one of the most beautiful things I've ever saw in nature was here at St. John's. In March of 1962, we had a phenomenon. We had a warm evening and an overnight rain, and it got very cold in the morning. And when I looked out my window at St. Mary's Hall, every tree on the campus was filled with ice, and the sun came out, and for about 40 minutes, we had every tree reflecting millions of rainbows as that light refracted through the ice on the trees. I'd never seen it before, never seen it since, never seen it anyplace else. That was one unique phenomenon here at St. John's. The world is full of those phenomena. I'll talk just a little bit about 2 or 3 things that I've learned. There's a lot of things that I've learned, but I'll try to. One of the things is the amazing phenomena called the law of unintended consequences, or unknown consequences. And let me give you several examples. In 1492, after about 100 years of Portuguese sailors trying to sail down the coast of Africa to get around the Cape of Good Hope, to get over here to Indonesia, to be able to access the salt and cinnamon and nutmeg and the spices of the Far East, which were highly prized back in Europe by the wealthy people. It didn't work very well because the storms and the currents here beat the hell out of their ships and busted them up, and a lot of them never made the transit. So in 1492, Prince Henry and his buddy Vasco da Gama said, you know, that's not working very well. Why don't we sail not along the coast of Africa, but sail 2,700 miles out into the South Atlantic, where we've never been before, and pick up these winds and sail past South Africa and the Cape of Good Hope and make our way up there. I often wondered if Vasco da Gama told his sailors that they were going to do that. I suspect they'd have all gone overboard or thrown him overboard. And he succeeded. And that resulted in 2 things that nobody anticipated. First of all, one of the richest countries in Europe was Venice, because Venice controlled the Mediterranean and therefore controlled all the trade that was coming on the Silk Roads via camel from China and Indonesia. And so Venice for 700 years was rich as sin, because they had all of that, and they controlled the entry into Europe. The day Vasco da Gama circled around south of Africa and headed this way, the sand began to run out under the foundation of the Republic of Venice. They didn't know it, nobody planned on it, but within 100 years, Venice was out of the ballgame. It was the law of unintended consequences. Venice eventually became sort of the brothel of Europe for 100 years or so, and now has become the Disneyland of Europe, the historic Disneyland of Europe. But they have never been a significant trading place since then. Simultaneously, as da Gama made this route, camel drivers and traders all the way from China, India, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, their industry also started to fade. Because once the ships could make the route, then the camel business, the Silk Road, the long caravans were gone. It took 100 years, 150 years, but the Middle East lost much of its value and started to decline, and the Western nations started to gain enormous economic advantage, and eventually then sailed to the West and took advantage of that as well. When Prince Henry and Vasco da Gama made that decision, they changed the world. From that day on, camels and caravans were never going to be an important power. Sailing ships and control of the sailing lanes of the seas became the source of national power. And for the next 500 years, European nations controlled the shipping lanes of the world. And the trade and the economic value was controlled by European nations, and since the early 1900s, the United States. While you and I were busy reading and so on, in about 1994, the Soviet Union's, Russia's fleet abandoned the Atlantic and the South Pacific and the Indian Ocean. And for the first time in 500 years, no European power controlled the sea lanes of the world when Russia's ships left. The United States basically controls and is the policeman of all the sea lanes of the world at this point. The other interesting thing that's happened since about 1994 is we set up a new Silk Road. We have new camel caravans, but they're not camels. They're giant container ships. Giant container ships are sailing from China, Japan, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, across the Pacific to the west coast of the United States. If you go to Long Beach, California, you will see ships that are 17 stories high, loaded with containers, full of the goods from Asia coming to America. We have a new Silk Road. It's across the Pacific, and it's in container ships instead of camels. The camels that I met in the Middle East seem pretty content with that deal. They don't mind that they don't have to make it anymore. But to me, it's fascinating that we are again have a Silk Road from the Far East countries to America and Europe, but it's giant container ships instead of camels. So things happen that affect all of our lives. The result of that is you and I go to Walmart and buy all kinds of stuff. I mean, we don't just buy one of everything, we buy 4 of everything and 7 of everything, and our kids have stuff stacked up, you don't have enough space. So the result of that is now one of the fastest growing industries in the United States is what? Storage space. Storage, places where you can rent space to put the stuff you can't keep in your house and your garage anymore, so you can go to Walmart or Kmart or wherever and buy more stuff so your kids can have more stuff that you can't walk to their room on. These things happen, and they're just the law of unintended consequences. Our military decided about 30 years ago they really needed a way to communicate a lot more. And they got the RAND Corporation to work on, along with about 12 universities, on a method of tying computers together so they could all work more. And something was created called the Internet. And it tied the computers at 12 universities together through the RAND Corporation. And so they could all access each other's data. You and I, at that moment, our lives totally changed. We didn't know it for about another 8 or 10 years, but our lives have totally changed. I spent last night talking with the librarian at St. John's Library, saying, what do librarians do now that everybody has laptops and can access all the information in the world? They don't need to go to the library anymore. Our lives have completely changed because the Defense Department made the decision to have the RAND Corporation connect interactively the computers at 12 universities. And then they said, well, we can do more than that, we can do more than that, more than that. And then they said, let's open it to the public. And now every one of us is connected all the time, so we don't ever have to talk to each other anymore. We never have to visit with each other anymore. We can just send texts to each other, But nobody thought that was going to happen. Nobody said, hey, if we do this, then people in Africa, 120 million people in Africa will have these little cell phones and they can text each other and so on. Nobody ever dreamed that. Nobody ever dreamed that. Things happen without us planning. Nobody thought India was going to become the IT capital of the world. Nobody thought China was going to take and become the manufacturing center for all of this stuff. Unbelievable, the changes that happen as a result of little decisions made here and there around the world. If you, as a student here, I want you to think about 2 or 3 things. One of which is that you're going to have to work for about 50 years after you leave St. John's and St. Ben's. That's an exciting thought. When we were here, we thought about 40 years because we thought we could retire when we were 65 or 62. Now it looks like you're going to have to go at least to 70, and by the time you get there, maybe 75. So if you leave here at 22 or 23, you got about 50 years to work. That should keep you up tonight for a while. So you say to yourself, at least part of that time, I hope, you will want to make a significant difference in the world. You want to do something that makes a difference for people, for your friends, your family, or somebody else. How do you do that? How does one do something that makes a world of difference? That totally changes the way something happens. We can ask Father Hillary. He was on the committee that decided to build a church unlike any other church in the world, that didn't look like anything St. John's had ever seen before, that probably the bishops in Cloud would frown upon, and half the monks in the monastery would want to string him up on a rope, and change how the world thinks about great churches. And they did it because they thought differently. And they dialogued with somebody who presented new concepts. Steve Jobs. Everybody else was busy trying to make computers with more power to store more data in the computers. And he said, I'll make computers. I'll make machines that aren't computers, but they'll just gather information from other places. And he created the iPads and the iPods and so on. Total difference in the computer world. Michael Dell had to come out of retirement. His company was about to go under. Dell Computer Corp was about to go under because Steve Jobs had a different idea. Totally changed. And as a result, all of us now have our little iPads. I can't even tell my wife anything without her checking on her iPad whether what I said was true or not. And I used to be able to sort of, say, well, back in 73, President Johnson did this or whatever. And she goes like this, and she said, no, it wasn't 73, it was 74. You don't know what you're talking about. Our founding fathers thought differently about government. It doesn't have to be a king who runs the government. It doesn't have to be a religious-oriented government. It can be run by the people. That was unheard of in 1775. Totally unheard of. And of course, the old guys in London thought these people in the colonies, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They did it, and everybody else followed. They set a whole new pattern. India's constitution is based on our Declaration of Independence. Kenya's is. Ghana. And the people rising up in Libya and Tunisia and in Egypt and Syria right now are saying the people have the right to decide how to run their government. That was unheard of in 1775. And these men chose to think differently, and it affects every one of us today. Gandhi and Nehru said, we can build a different kind of country. We can build a country where it's the business of the country to reach every village and offer them a school, health care, to develop the entire country. It's the job of government to care about everybody in the country, not just to absorb resources for wealthy families. India is one of the few countries that achieved that. It's a new way of thinking. Martin Luther came in late 50s and said, we have to have a new way of thinking about how black people are treated. The rights, they have to be treated as human beings. The promise of the American Constitution is a blank check that has not been carried out. It took them 30 years and we got it. Legally anyway. It was a new way of thinking. John the 23rd called the Vatican Council and said, we need to rethink how the Catholic Church operates. And we're going to sit here and discuss this until we get it right. We're going to reach out to the rest of the world in a very, very different way. John the 23rd, with the help of some of the Benedictines from St. John's and elsewhere, St. Ben's, forced us all to look at things differently. Here at St. John's, the Abbey Church, the pottery program there makes us relook the arts. The St. John's Bible, they decided to create a new Bible 500 years since the last one was created. For what purpose? Nobody could tell for sure. Was it going to sell? Nobody knew. Did we need a new Bible? No, they decided we need to just do it. And they did it. And St. John's is unique with the new Bible. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, they decided they needed to digitalize, or more accurately, microfilm, and now digitalize the great books in the monasteries of the world. For what purpose, nobody quite knew, except to protect them, to keep them forever. And they are still doing it. And now if I have my way, and I and Father Hilary and others can do something about it, we'll get them to also digitalize the great books of the Islamic religion as well. We'll look at that a new way and see if we can find a way to help them preserve all of that's good for them. I want to share with you that there are some things coming up in the world that we all need to be ready for. I've learned a few lessons from all of this. First lesson I've learned is that wherever I've gone, whatever the country, whatever the ethnic background of people, the religious background, the language, 90% of the people are good people. They're just good people who want to raise their families, educate their children, create economic opportunities for their children, live healthy lives, live to old age cared for by their children, and die with dignity. They're not interested in great battles or great world issues or great power struggles or whether the government is Pushtu or Hazara or Sindh or whatever it is. They just want to live their lives. And I say that to you so you understand, amongst all this chaos and cacophony that you read and hear about in the world news today, that underneath all of that, 90% of the people just want to be left alone to raise their family and their kids and love their kids and see their grandchildren and live a decent life. It's hard to remember that because on the news every night there's an explosion here, there's a bomb here, somebody wins there, somebody there. Bashir is doing this, Assad is doing that, or he's going to fall or he's not going to fall, or the Israeli government's going to do this, or the Palestinians or the Afghans. Soldier goes berserk and so on. And you say the world's nuts. And in some ways it is. But for 90% of the people, it's just down to the basics. And so that gets you to whether they're Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Catholic, evangelical. It doesn't much matter. How they worship their God is not the issue. It's how they raise their families, their children, care for each other, and build a just and decent society. It doesn't matter. To have these giant conflicts between Islam and Judaism and Christianity all religions that grew out of Abraham and his descendants, is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against humanity. The Crusades were crimes against humanity, and the Islamic terrorism bombings are crimes against humanity, because the people just want to live their lives and raise their children. And I am afraid, and I share this with you, we are facing a potential tectonic friction between the Islamic world and the Western Christian world. Nuclear bombs and nuclear arms are the potential that could make this terrible for all of us. And unless somebody does something to diffuse the anger and hatred amongst young Islamic people towards the Western world, we all, our children and our grandchildren, face some very, very dangerous times. We're facing them right now with the question of Iran and its nuclear bomb and the potential, and the drums are beating to bomb the hell out of Iran right now, and so on. There is in front of us, it's not new, it's been going on for 1,000 years, but it's coming to new levels of force between the Islamic world and the Western Christian world. And it's something that all of you at St. John's and St. Ben's should be thinking about, because it's your leadership in the coming decades that's going to have to deal with it. It's not entirely our fault. There are great struggles within Islam over who's going to be in charge and what kind of Islam it's going to be, and whether their governments should be religious-based or secular-based or led by certain leaders. And many of them are diverting the struggle to struggle against the West in order to avoid the internal issue. But we do face a tectonic struggle right now between Islam and the West. The other thing I would share with you, what I've learned from all of this, when you hear the news and when you read the stories about what's happening in the world, follow an old Arabic saying. Always look around to see which camel has its nose under the tent. These things are a hell of a lot more complicated than they come across in the news. Who is gaining by not having the war in Afghanistan stop? If you're the owner of a big trucking fleet in Karachi, Pakistan, you are making money like you've never made money before or ever will again, shipping American military supplies from Karachi all the way up through the Khyber Pass to Afghanistan. You don't want that to stop. The gravy train is unbelievable. You get paid almost unlimited amounts, and you pay off the insurgents. The insurgents don't want it to stop, because if they get paid not to attack the tankers and the trucks, that's about as easy money as it can be. So they don't want it to stop. The Pakistan government doesn't want it to stop. You and I know why Osama bin Laden, they didn't know he was there. Because for 10 years, if they would have captured or turned him over to us, we'd have stopped giving them $500 million of military aid immediately, a year. So if it was worth $5 billion to not know that he's there, we had to go find him ourselves. I would have never turned him in if I had been the Pakistani Secret Service. I'd have kept him under wraps. Even if I'd killed him, I wouldn't have told you. It was worth $500 million a year. There are people who have vested interest in all of this continuing. A whole series of Islamic countries do not want the Palestinian question settled. Because as long as the United States and Israel are preoccupied with Palestine, we can't bother with them. And they have a perfect excuse for doing whatever they do, because they say, you know, the West is oppressing the Palestinians. And so you can't expect us to do other things. They don't want it settled. They don't want a strong Palestine. Nobody wanted Yasser Arafat to be president of his country. The guy was nothing but trouble wherever he went. So they didn't let him. And they don't want it settled. Because as long as it's not settled, Israel is under control. If Palestine was settled, then they wouldn't have any excuse to tell their people, well, we can't do anything about Israel. So they don't want it stopped. You need to understand in all of these situations, there are people who have their nose under the tent. You're going to build an oil line from Canada to Louisiana. It's going to be this great thing. Maybe it is. But who's going to make money off of it? Ask yourself. Who's investing in that? Who's going to make money if it's approved or disapproved? There's always all kinds of undercurrents underneath all of these things. The government of Iran is not a monolithic thing. There are all kinds of power struggles in Iran. We might, if these people fall, we might get something worse. We might get something better. All kinds of things going on all the time. It's much more complicated. There are dozens of camels' noses under every tent. And that's something that I want you to know. It took me about 30 years to learn all of this. So I'm trying to share it with you ahead of time. And with that, I always start out preparing for these speeches saying, I'm going to pick 3 things I want to say, and just say those 3 things and then stop. And then I start making my notes. I told Matt, then I end up with 13 pages of notes of all the things I want to say. And then I can't figure out what things not to say. But I'll wrap up with a couple of other thoughts. As you go out into the somewhat chaotic world, dominated by instant communications that bombard you all the time. You can't even go to the bathroom without this thing bombarded. The other day I was in the men's room at an office, and there was a guy standing at the urinal doing his... I said, my God, I hope he washed the and so on. You're never going to get a moment's peace again. When I was at St. John's, one of the things they made us do was a 3-day silent retreat. Anybody here remember that? For 3 days between the first semester and the second semester, everybody had to be silent. You couldn't talk, couldn't have the radio on. You know, they had these things called radios those days. We didn't have telephones in the room. We had phone booths, pay phones in Mary Hall down in the basement. And we had to come to church, and they had a retreat master who gave a homily and told us to think about important things, which we did, a little bit, some of us. And they gave us some readings to read, and then we'd all go to lunch in the refectory, and it was absolute silence. All you could hear was the silverware on the plates. For 3 days. And a couple of guys like Dick Hague would cheat and so on, but he'd go see Eileen and they'd talk. But and at the time I thought it was a little screwy. I said, well, these Benedictines are a little bit over the top. Now I realize 50 years later, that was the last time I had 3 days of peace and quiet in my entire life. Now you're lucky to get 3 hours. More likely 3 minutes without this thing ringing or something going on, and you're hit all the time. So as you go out amongst all of this cacophony and all of this political atmosphere and all of this, what's going on in the world, and soldiers massacring people and and so on, all this stuff you have to worry about. Now, the other night we had dinner, and now I find out I have to worry about the monarch butterflies. They're disappearing because we're pulling all the milkweeds out of our gardens, and I love the monarch butterflies, but I don't know if I've got anything left for the monarch butterflies, so they're going to have to come to you. It's every day you read, things you thought were good for you are bad for you. Now maybe they're not so good. Maybe they are better, and so on. Maybe, oh gosh, maybe we should have the pap smears or whatever. It's just too much for me. And to try to keep some sanity amongst all of that, I will share with you a couple of things that seem to me to give me some hope. All through my life, I was a great admirer of the poet Robert Frost. And I always kept above my desk a photo of some aspen trees and the words from his poem, The Road Not Taken. The woods is lovely, dark and deep, and I have promises to keep and miles to walk before I sleep. And I always felt that I had miles to walk before I sleep, and that gave me the energy and the spirit to keep doing these things. The other quote that I think is fantastic, and I want you to know this one because it'll fit on Twitter. And it'll give you a sense of balance amidst all of this madness. It's from the book of Micah, the Old Testament. And it says, "This is all that Yahweh asks of you. Only this. Act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God." Fits on your Twitter. Very, very powerful stuff. It's not easy to act justly, but that's what Yahweh said you have to do. Loving tenderly may seem easy to you young folks, but it's a long road, and it's tough. And to walk humbly with your God is also a great challenge. So I share that with you because he asks so little and yet it's so much. But if you can do those things, act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God, you'll keep some sanity amidst all the madness of this world. The last thing I want to share, I talked to Father Don Talifus earlier this week. I studied at St. John's, and I took these theology and religion and philosophy and logic classes that we were required to do in those days, in those medieval times. And I left here with this sense of who is God? God is sort of this father figure to whom we all hope to somehow live our lives in a way that he will see favorably. In the Old Testament, he was pretty grouchy and sort of punitive and, kind of smacked us around a bit. And in the New Testament, he became somewhat mellower and offered more opportunities for love and sharing and joining him in eternal life. That was kind of the way I went through life, with a sense of that God is this somehow benevolent, ultimate Father to which we're all going to return someday. But recently, I went to the Air and Space Museum with my other grandson, and we watched the IMAX film on the Hubble telescope. And the Hubble telescope has shown us that the universe is now at least 100,000 times bigger than we ever thought. That this world was created by a big bang 150 billion years ago. And the Milky Way has a billion stars in it, and it's one of a billion galaxies. And this thing is full of power and quasars that are disappearing and black holes and enormous forces operating on each other. It's bigger than anything I could ever think about and imagine. I walked out of there saying, how do you describe it? We don't have words for that. And then the next day I read in The Economist about the latest medical research about DNA in our cells, and how every one of the million cells in our body has a DNA signature that is unique to me or you, and it's in every one of our cells, and everyone is connected and tied to everybody else that was ever in our background, our life, our history, going all the way back to whatever. And somebody, some mind, some creature, some God, some Yahweh, some Allah, somebody somehow is behind all of this. I don't quite know and understand it. And I suppose that's where you have to follow what the medieval theologians said, you have to have faith. But I think our theologians at St. John's and St. Ben's should be challenged to find new ways to describe this God, new words, new language, so that all of us who leave here at least understand, whether we want to argue politically over creationism or intelligent design, but we got to tell our kids someday, whoever this is, whatever it is, created this vast, unimaginable universe in the tiniest little cells. And every one of them is a work of human engineering beyond our conception. God is something greater. At the funeral of my good friend Sergeant Shriver, his son described what his father said about God. He said they were facing the sunset one day on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and the sun was setting, and there was this magnificent sunset. And his father, who was 65 years old at the time, was watching that sunset, and Mark said, "Dad, what are you thinking?" And his dad said, "I'm just thinking, I can't wait till I die." And Mark said, "Dad, you're only 6, why?" He said, "Think of this. What an adventure it's going to be to die and go and meet the being that can create this. What an adventure is lying just beyond." And then when I came out of that IMAX film, I said, "Holy smolies, this is an adventure. It's going to be quite a ride, quite a ride." And so I hope you think about that and try to figure out who this God is, what he is, what it is, she is. There used to be a bumper sticker in the late 60s that said, "The Lord is coming, and is she pissed?" That caused us to pause also. Anyway, live justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God amidst all this chaos. Have a great, great 50 years of your life and plus, and thanks for this opportunity to share some thoughts. I'll be around till Thursday. If you have questions, I'm always willing to talk some more. And I still have at least 8 pages of notes I didn't get. So thank you so much. Thank you. I brought with me 3 or 4 copies of the biography of this man who said, "I can't wait till I die." If any of you youngsters would like to thumb through this, you're welcome to take a copy and take it with you. He's an amazing figure. He was a great hero of mine and a great mentor of mine. Thank you very much. Sure.
I can actually start off. I have kind of a question more around your work as a humanitarian, but I think it's Doctors Without Borders that say, like, we always look for where the greatest need is and we try to go there. I guess in your experience, where's currently the greatest need? If you had to pinpoint as someone who works in aid, what does everybody need to be looking at?
Well, in terms of human suffering, what is happening in the Eastern Congo, it remains just unbelievable what is happening to people in this area and in southern Sudan. The power fights amongst the young guys who run militias, and the murdering of people, the kidnapping of people, the enrolling of young children into their militias and armies is absolutely devastating. And none of us has any appetite, none of the Western nations, none of the Arab nations or anybody else has any appetite to go into Central Africa, in the Congo region, in the rainforest jungles of that region, and try to sort this out. And the result is that women and children are just devastated in the process. And all these families that I mentioned to you who just want to raise their kids and go, it ain't happening. Haiti is your second one. And Haiti, it's criminal because the government of Haiti cannot get itself reorganized in order to rebuild its country. And the people of Haiti have been waiting for 100 years. And unfortunately, the government of Haiti adopted the worst part of the French system when they became independent. And 15, 20 families control all the resources. And they fight between themselves over who's going to be president, who's going to be in the Congress, and who gets to steal the most money for themselves. And the international community doesn't want to put money in there because they know it's not going to get to the people. And so they're in stasis. There's $800 million waiting to go and help the people of Haiti rebuild their houses, their clinics, and so on. Only thing going in there is what the international nonprofit and religious groups are doing, because the leadership of that country is behaving at best totally incompetently and at worst criminally in destroying their own people. And it's a great, great sadness. Great, great sadness. I wish the government of Canada would take them over and run them for 20 years and set up a functioning government. Very, very sad. Very sad indeed. I think the other thing that I think is terrible, and you're at fault, is when you find in the villages of Asia women and children who are being employed to take apart used iPhones and iPads and C phones and dig out the little pieces of gold and lithium and whatever the hell it is. You and I think we're recycling these things, and these contractors are bundling them up, putting them in containers and shipping them to these other countries and paying contractors there who pay villagers almost nothing to sit amongst all of this stuff and dismantle the phones that you've thrown away, not because they're not useful or they're not functional, because there's a newer and better one. iPad 3 has come and you just got to have one. You just got to have an iPad 3. You can't have an old iPad 2. And we're criminally responsible for people to being exposed to this. And we think we're not.
Oh, great.
Thanks, John, for the great presentation. I have one question. Have you ever experienced at one point in your life you ever doubted you will be able to act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God?
More often than I care to admit. More often than I care to admit, yes. The loving tenderly is particularly difficult. It's easy to do it part of the time, but it's hard to do it all the time. When things are grating on you, when your nerves are shot, when they're doing something you don't want it to do, and so on. I have my daughters here. She can assure you that occasionally I was not loving tenderly. I told her I was doing this for her own good and so on, but it wasn't exactly tenderly. Walking humbly with your God has been very, very difficult. It's hard to remain humble. There's plenty of times when you think you're really a hell of a lot better or more important than you might be. And then figuring out who this God is that I'm going to walk with and where. When I'm in the middle of an Islamic country or a Hindu country and all my people around me, what is this God? What is this Christian God? And when I see the terrible things that can happen in the world, what's happening to people in Syria today, you say, where is this God? Where is the justice? Where is this? And, you really have to question. And I suppose Father Don would say, if you don't question that, then you don't really know who your God is. But yeah, it's been plenty of times when it's difficult.
Yes, thanks for coming. And I have a question. Like 55 countries traveling to is quite impressive. If you could take this whole room to a place on Earth, where would it be?
Well, if you ask my wife, it'd be Puerto Rico. She's from Puerto Rico. So if you ask my wife, then I guess that's on my list, because the United States is a great place to live, no question. If I had my total choice, I think it might be Beirut, Lebanon, because I'm a history person. I love the Middle East. I love the history, the 5,000 years of the Phoenicians sailing out of the Lebanese coast and going all across the world, and so on. The camel trains. I've sat and had supper in caravanserais in Baku that were 800 years old. I've had meals in an old water cistern in Istanbul that's 500 years old. I've sat on the floor in the Jewish quarter in old Jerusalem, and it's 3,000 years old. To me, I'd live in the Middle East just for the history. It's unbelievable. And the brilliance of people and the flow of ideas and so on. If it was just me, I think that's where I would be. Otherwise, St. John's. I told President Bob that they need to get some retirement apartments here so that I can come and live here for a year and walk to church every day and sit and have coffee with Father Don, and we can figure out who this God is that puts up the quasars and black holes and all of that sort of stuff over coffee every morning.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, I think we're going to wrap up there. But thanks so much for coming. Let's give Don a hand.